Well, happy frigid late morning in March. Welcome to the Big Sky Investor Show. My name is Luke Anderson. I am your host. Thanks for joining me on this very frigid morning. It's I think it's up to 0 now here in Montana. It's almost lunchtime, and we've seen double-digit negative temperatures for a little while here. And it's no fun. I am sitting in my office. Literally, if you're watching this on video, I have my blankie. Got a big, thick blanket wrapped around my legs and my feet. Big, thick wool socks. Wearing my beanie. Wearing a hoodie. It's all bundled up and warm. Trying to be anyway. Yet my toes are still cold. So don't know how that works. Anyway, so today I wanted to jump in. I wanted to do a couple of some episodes. I've been promising some filler episodes since there's been some inconsistency in the show, and I've been working on it. It's a learning process, you know. We ended up having a bit of a family emergency. Had a family member who got in a very severe car accident and went in for some scans in the hospital and found out they had kidney cancer. So got rushed into surgery within a few days, and all is well now, but it was quite the scare, and we were just like, blah. So anyway, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in another episode. And we'll go from there. But today I wanted to just go over with some of these filler episodes, I guess, do just some brief explanations on some terminology and concepts and things like that, specifically in real estate. I kind of going back to the basics. I've been really evaluating what I need to be doing personally in my own business, and really just with looking at looking over notes and content, just really doing a deep dive into where I'm at. And I just thought, you know what, it would be good for me to go back to the basics. So, it's early in the year, just kind of refresh on everything, reestablish concepts and principles, and make sure I'm still on track with everything that I want to accomplish. So, I want to dive into like I said, some concepts that are specific to real estate. If you followed the show so far, a lot of the episodes are not real estate specific. They are applicable because real estate as we've talked about, is a business, and so a lot of my stuff is business related. Because real estate is just a vehicle or a tool or an industry to do business in. Anyway, so I'm going to do some real estate specific stuff. Thought I would start with wholesaling. So if you're not familiar with wholesaling is essentially essentially a strategy to sell your interest in a real estate contract. So you're selling your position in a real estate contract. So the concept of wholesaling, if you're not familiar with it, basically is the steps of wholesaling is basically going and finding a property and negotiating it, getting it under contract with a clause in there that allows you to assign your position to a different end buyer. And then you take that contract and you sell your position for a higher price than what you negotiated to get it under contract, if that makes sense. So as an example, I'll give you an example. You find a house, you work with the seller, you negotiate with the seller, they need $100,000 for the house, just as an example. So they need $100,000. You have a buyer and they're willing to pay $120,000 for this particular house. You tell them what the condition is, what it needs from what you know about it, the area it's in, blah, 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 blah. You run through it, whatever they need to know. They say, I'd pay 120 for it. Great. So what you do is you take it to the title company and you have them process it. And basically the seller gets their 100 grand. The buyer is paying 120. So you get the difference. That's your assignment fee, essentially. Now, you're not selling real estate. If you're selling your like I said, you're assigning your interest is what you're doing. You're assigning your interest in on the contract for a fee. So there's three main aspects to doing a wholesale deal, and I wanted to walk through those with you. The first thing you need to do is establish a relationship with a title company that will process these transactions for you. That's the first step. Most people want to go out and start finding deals and putting them under contract, but then they don't know what to do after that. So the first thing you need to do is you need to find a title company that will process the types of transactions you need. Now, there's two types of transactions you can do in order to achieve or to complete this wholesaling strategy. The first is called a double close or ABC transaction. Though that I've never personally done that. It can be more complicated, and it can cost more money because you have to pay closing costs and stuff like that. So basically the concept of that is you close on the first contract and then right away you sell it to the end buyer. So you may have to end up coming out of pocket for that initially for some of those fees and things like that. You can't blanket the whole transaction with the end buyer's money sometimes. There is ways around that. You can do what's called transactional funding, and you pay a fee to basically utilize a transactional funding agency or organization's money to pay that, like the fees, like in between. So basically it goes into your name. You pay the fees either with your money or with the funding agency's money. And then when they close again, then you get paid from the seller, and then they get reimbursed. The funding agency gets reimbursed, or you get reimbursed, whoever's money you use. So I don't know if reimbursed is the right word, but you understand what I mean. Anyway, I've never done that, but that's in a nutshell. That's how that works. The other type of transaction, which is much more simple, is called an assignment of contract. So that is, like I was explaining a little bit earlier, is you have a contract, you put it under contract, under your LLC or your self-directed IRA or you personally, and you have the ability to assign it to a different end buyer. So then it's still one transaction. So you want to contact title companies. You want to ask them for their sale by owner contract or package. I've also heard it called the offer to purchase package. Basically, it's their paperwork that would be necessary to complete this type of transaction. Using their documents is easier because they're familiar with them. They're the ones that created them, and then they can more easily tweak them as needed. So you want to ask about that. You also want to ask if they will do either a double close or ABC transaction. So ABC basically is A is the seller, B is you, C is the buyer. So they call it ABC because you're just moving down the line. Anyway, so either a double close or an assignment of contract. And if they ask that's illegal, or if they say, oh, that's illegal, or what is that, they probably don't do that. So anyway, so it's to clarify, because there's a lot of misconceptions with it. I'm not going to dive into it because there's a lot more content on this other places. But basically, wholesaling is not illegal in any state that I'm aware of. It is legal in all 50 states from all the research that I've done. And Now, do people get in trouble with it? Absolutely. Just like anything, you have to make sure that you understand how to properly do it. Like I said, I don't sell real estate. I sell my position in the contract, or I assign my position in the contract, because I'm not a realtor. I don't sell real estate. Got it? So, or broker real estate, I guess is the term. So, anyway, so where was I at? Right. So you need to ask them if they do an assignment of contract. If they do it, they'll know what you're talking about. You can explain to them what you're trying to do. And you probably will have to go through several, because not all title companies will know what that is. Not all title companies have done that before. They have every title company that has the capability of doing it. It's just a matter of whether they've done it before and they know what you're talking about. So number one, you got to find a title company that is familiar with wholesaling and familiar with assignment of contract, transactions that can help you with that. Number two is then you find the buyers. So no, we're not going out and looking for properties even yet. Okay. You want to establish who the buyers in your market are, or the market that you're going to be wholesaling in. So you're looking for buyers, and there's many ways to do that. There's lots of strategies to do that, but probably the simplest is going to like a RIA meeting, or looking on your local Facebook real estate groups or investor groups. See who's active in there, and see who's constantly looking for properties, or who's buying properties, who's selling properties. I mean, you can deduce who's buying in a market rather quickly. You can also put up ads like in Facebook Marketplace. You can put up ads in Craigslist, on other listing sites, saying that you're looking for buyers and get in connection with them. Now, the key is with all three of these steps is building relationships. You need to build a relationship with the title company. And that'll go a long way, especially when you're completing these transactions. I did not do that in the beginning. I was very transactional in my relationships, and that really didn't serve me well. I don't know why I did that. I think it was just the time of my life when I did do wholesaling, and I still will do wholesaling, but it's not my primary focus. So maybe that's part of it. But anyway, it makes life a lot easier when you can build relationships with those people. And because I had to go back in and like rebuild a relationship, and really and that's really where my strength and my favorite part of anything in business is the relational bit. So why I didn't do that in the beginning, I don't know, but I had to go back and reestablish a relationship, which I'm still working on now. Same thing with buyers. You need to establish a relationship with buyers. You need to know what they want, where they want it. You need to know their criteria in and out. You need to know, do they follow the, I always mess it up when I say it, but like 70% of ARV minus expenses, right? That's kind of a traditional thing. Do they have different criteria? Do they want three twos? Do they want 5 1s? Do they want 1 1s? I don't know. Do they want, south of the railroad tracks, north of the river, whatever the criteria is, that you need to figure out what they want, where they want it, so that you're bringing them relevant leads or relevant properties. And you don't go out and get a property under contract like, oh, you want 3 2s south of the railroad tracks, north of the river, east of 13th Street, whatever. And you bring them something that's like, oh, I got it north of the railroad tracks on the west end of town over by 67th or 66th, and it's a 5-4, 5 bedroom, 4 bath, like totally irrelevant to your buyer. So build a relationship with your buyer, find out what the criteria is. The next step is then finding sellers. Okay. So this is the part that everyone usually does first. It's actually the last step, major step anyway. And that is finding sellers. So you can do this by word of mouth. You can do this through listing sites, the same way you were finding buyers, Craigslist, buy sell groups, for Facebook Marketplace, wherever, right? Sellers are everywhere. You can do bandit signs, you can go door knocking, you can send letters, there's a plethora of strategies. We'll talk about that another time. So then you identify sellers. Here you need to build a relationship as well. By building a relationship and really diving into what the seller needs, you will identify how you can best solve their problem. Also, you will probably, most likely, you'll have the ability to, or the opportunity, I should say, to get the best deal. Okay, get the price lowered because if you're going to truly try and solve their problem. So, like as an example, I had one where a wholesale deal I worked on that. The person had, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was I don't remember the exact numbers. I'm trying to think what it was. Something like, it was like the house was 160 or 165, something like that. And, yeah, I think that was it. Anyway, so we'll go with that. We'll roll with that. It was like 160, 165, something like that. Got to know the seller. They were pretty firm on price. Kept talking to them and building a relationship with them, and really didn't find their why they were selling initially. And so I'm like, well, I'll just throw a number out there. And they were now kind of offended by my number. And so we went back and started talking, and then I started asking better questions and really found that they were trying to put the down payment down on a different house somewhere else. And they needed X amount of money for the down payment on the house. They were also buying a business, so they needed some down payment money for the business. So we figured out what the money they were short on those things, because they had other money that they were putting towards it. And so we got it down, and it actually ended up working to being about at the price my first offer was. So by having that conversation, working it down to, I don't know what it was, like 110 or something like that. And then I was able to go to my buyer and say, this fits your criteria. After we've talked, like, what would you pay for it? And I actually did that before putting it under contract. I said, this is the details. This is what it needs. What would you pay for it? And I was able to make a little bit of a profit on that. So that worked out well, solved the problem for the seller, and was able to find a good property for my buyer, because I asked better questions. Yay. So in a nutshell, that's wholesaling. Now you can do this over and over and over again. It's just one-time payments. Now you can, and I have not done this, but I know people that have, I'd like to do this, is you can turn those payments into reoccurring payments instead of big lump sums. Ooh. Pardon me. You can turn those into payments by taking your wholesale fee as a note. So you basically create a note and then have that wholesale fee paid off over time. So that's a cool strategy as well. Anyway, so in a nutshell, that's wholesaling. So you get a title company, you get the paperwork all figured out on what you need. They say, yep, we can do those types of transactions. You market and put the feelers out for buyers. You build relationships with the buyers that you identify. You start looking for property that meets their criteria. You build relationships with the sellers. You present the properties to your buyers and ask them what they pay for it. If the numbers work out, you get it under contract, and everything goes from there. So, the buyer does the due diligence, all that jazz, and you close, and then the seller gets paid, you get paid, and the buyer gets the house. Hooray! So now in that whole thing, I did not. One thing I should say too, that I meant to say earlier and I forgot. Now, one of the key things that with wholesaling is all the properties that I'm looking at, and that I wholesale, this is just me personally, not everyone does this, but I think it's a good rule of thumb personally, is every property I look at and that I get under contract, or consider getting under contract, are all properties that I would consider purchasing myself and adding to my portfolio. Now, then if it doesn't work out, then I can say, okay, this goes to, I'm going to present this to my investor friends and say, this is the deal I've got. It ended up not fitting my criteria, but I got it under contract, or, have a verbal agreement so I can get it to get it under contract by this day. Well, whatever the case may be. Would this seems to fit your criteria? Do you want to move on this? So that, because it was something that initially I was going to purchase myself and keep, but it ended up not working. So then I pass it off to another person. I'm just giving my interest. So, giving my interest to another investor or buyer for a fee. So to me, that's a good rule of thumb, is if it's something that I would acquire personally. If it's not, then it can be construed, I guess, as being unethical, and that can be frowned upon. I don't think you'd really have a problem with it, but that's just what I like to do to be on the safe side. So I hope that makes sense. Anyway, so that is wholesaling in a nutshell. And I just wanted to go over that real quick, just so you had some reference when you hear me talking about wholesaling. I'm excited for you to join me again on the next one. If you like this, you can follow along. My personal social media handles are at Luke John Anderson. John is just Jon, no H. Also, I am getting everything up and running for the Big Sky Investor Show, and we'll get those social media handles updated presently. But getting that figured out, like I need the YouTube channel kind of redone, so it'll be its own channel instead of on mine. So I'll be putting all that info into the podcast show notes and stuff like that in the future. Thanks again for joining me. We'll see you next time.